Summer of 79, a Summer of 69 story. Written by Elin Hilderbrand. Read by Erin Bennett. Chapter 1. Hot Child in the City. Jessie Levin is drinking an ice-cold can of Tab on the northwest corner of Washington Square Park when her sister Kirby pulls up in her butterscotch-colored Ford LTD with the sunroof open, strains of Lou Reed floating out like a haze. "Hey, babe, take a walk on the wild side." Reed must have been talking about Washington Square Park in this song, Jessie thinks. She has done a fair amount of studying in the park while she's been in law school, and she's seen it all. Punk rockers with purple hair and pierced lips walking their dachshunds, drag queens eating knishes, a couple painted gold who set a boombox on the lip of the fountain and discoed to Chopin's Polonaise in A-flat major. "Get in!" Kirby shouts. "Just throw your suitcase in the back seat." Jessie does as she's told. Kirby's back seat is as big as Grand Central Terminal, but even so, the cars lining up behind the LTD start honking and someone yells, "Move your tush, sweetheart!" Kirby pulls away from the curb before Jessie even has her door closed. Jessie sets her macrame pocketbook on the front seat next to a tray of hot dogs from Gray's Papaya. She kicks off her Dr. Scholl's and puts her feet on the dash. "I know I shouldn't feel happy," she says, "but I do. I took my last exam this morning. I have a full week off before I start my internship, and we're going to Nantucket." "I'm happy too," Kirby says. "Or I would be if I weren't so hungover." She pulls a cigarette out of a pack of Virginia Slims with her lips and leans over to Jessie, who rummages through her pocketbook for matches. She finds a pack from McSorley's. Jessie's ex-boyfriend Theo basically lives there. Jessie lights Kirby's cigarette and fights the urge to throw the matches out the open window. The city is so dirty, what difference would it make? Because she has taken great pains to rid her tiny studio apartment and her Carol at Bobst Library of everything Theo-related. "I need to get out of this city," Jessie says, at the same time that Kirby says, "I need to get out of this city." "Jinx," Kirby says, "you owe me a Coke." She blows smoke out the window without taking the cigarette from her mouth. "Why do you need to get out of the city?" Jessie asks. Kirby's life in New York is glossy and fabulous. She's the sex and relationships editor at Cosmopolitan. She lives rent-free in a loft down on Broome Street, where she babysits the paintings and sculptures of the artist Willie 8 while Willie travels the world. He's in New York only 1 week per month, and it's during those weeks that Kirby's life gets even more enviable. Kirby and Willie's boyfriend, Tornado Jack, have long, lavish dinners at Mr. Chow and the Quilted Giraffe, and then they go to Studio 54. Through Willie, Kirby has met Baryshnikov, Farrah Fawcett, Richard Pryor. It seems outlandish that Kirby, Jessie's own sister, has rubbed elbows with such celebrities, though as Kirby says with her usual world weariness, "They're just people, Jess." In Kirby's own pocketbook, a tan suede fringed hobo, she keeps a Polaroid picture in an envelope. The picture is of Kirby linking arms with Willie and Tornado Jack. Sitting in front of them with his signature platinum mop and clear horn-rimmed glasses is, Andy Warhol. Kirby has met Andy Warhol. Kirby sighs. "I've been burning the joint at both ends." Well, yes, so has Jessie. But whereas Jessie goes to torts and contracts during the day and studies at night, Kirby strolls into the Hearst offices at the crack of 10:15 with her sunglasses still on and receives congratulations for it. Kirby reports directly to Helen Gurley Brown, who has assigned Kirby the task of writing about the after-hours lives of young urban women, which means spending night after night out on the town. Jessie isn't naive. Kirby said joint, but Jessie knows she's drinking every night. Tequila sunrises that become more tequila and less sunrise as the hour grows later. And also, she snorts cocaine. Probably a lot of cocaine. Kirby may even be a cocaine addict. The edges of her nose are pink like a rabbit's, and she keeps sniffing. Jessie wonders if she should express her concern, maybe tell Kirby the story of poor Cesar Coelho, her fellow second-year law student, who also liked to frequent Limelight and Studio 54. A few weeks earlier, Cesar overdosed and died. The next day in Jessie's property law class, a girl said she'd heard the cocaine made Cesar's heart pop like a balloon. The song changes to Player, Baby Come Back. Any kind of fool could see. There won't be any cocaine on Nantucket, Jessie thinks, though there will be drinking, starting first thing in the morning with mimosas. Jessie has vivid memories of her grandmother, Exalta, sucking down 2 or 3 mimosas on the patio of the Field and Oar Club while Jessie took her tennis lessons. Despite the ungodly heat of this sweltering June day, Jessie gets a chill. Exalta is dead. She died in her sleep 2 days earlier in the house on Fair Street, while Mr. Crimmins, their former caretaker, slept beside her. Jessie and Kirby are heading up to Nantucket for the funeral tomorrow, which will be followed by a reception at the Field and Oar Club, which will be followed by a bonfire on Rampasture Beach. The bonfire is Kirby's brainchild. She's calling it Midnight at the Oasis, and it's for family and close friends only, although Kirby pointedly has not invited their parents, saying they won't want to come anyway. Jessie and Kirby sit in traffic on the Cross Bronx for what feels like days. Jessie drifts off for a second, and she thinks maybe Kirby does as well. But then I-95 clears. Kirby puts the pedal to the metal, and the LTD goes sailing right up alongside a tractor-trailer. Jessie yanks her elbow down once, twice, 3 times, and the trucker honks his horn, which gives Jessie a silly thrill. She feels like a character from Smokey and the Bandit. "Flash him," Kirby says. Jessie considers it for a second, then remembers that her older sister is a terrible influence. They have more fun on the drive up to Hyannis than they should under the circumstances. They devour the hot dogs. Kirby doctored them with just the right amount of mustard, relish, onions, and sauerkraut, and the radio gods are with them because they hear one great song after another. Lonesome Loser, beaten by the Queen of Hearts every time. One way or another, I'm gonna getcha, 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 getcha. Knock on wood. It's like thunder, lightning. The way I love you is frightening. After they finish singing at the top of their lungs with Bonnie Tyler to It's a Heartache, Nothing But a Heartache, Kirby turns down the radio and says, "So what happened with you and Theo anyway?" Jessie doesn't want to talk about Theo, but she needs to come up with some kind of answer for her family. Jessie met Theo her first week at NYU. She'd done her undergraduate work at Mount Holyoke, and so New York City and men were a dramatic change. Theo Feigenbaum had thick dark hair, green eyes, and remarkably long dark lashes. He sat next to Jessie in their lawyering seminar and asked her to borrow a pencil and a piece of loose leaf, which Jessie gave him while wondering what kind of bozo showed up to the first day of class unprepared. But when he raised his hand to offer an example of jurisprudence, Jessie fell in love. They dated the entire first year, then through the summer, then into autumn of their second year, when they basically cohabitated. But the second year of law school was more difficult than the first, just like the second year of a relationship. The things that had been fun, even blissful, studying together in the park, getting pizza at St. Mark's Place, splurging on a foreign film at the Angelica, or sneaking into the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was easy enough to find discarded metal buttons on the steps and attach them to their collars, lost their luster. And there was no time anyway. Besides which, Theo grew increasingly jealous of how well Jessie was doing in class and how easily she had landed a summer associate's job at Cadwallader. He started to turn mean and surly. He put Jessie down in public, at McSorley's, for example, in front of their mutual friends, and argued with every single point she made in class. Jessie would be embarrassed to admit to Kirby how she backed down, how she apologized, how her main objective became to placate Theo and diffuse his growing anger, how she intentionally turned in a sloppy opinion so that he would get a better grade. Jessie watched herself make concession after concession, even as she yearned to be strong and stand up for herself like a proper women's libber. But she had wanted Theo to be happy. She had wanted him to love her. And so she yielded, she flattered him, she diminished herself to make him appear bigger. And what had this gotten her? It had gotten her a kick to the gut, a fat smack to her pride. One night when Jessie had spent the last dollars of her monthly stipend on Reuben sandwiches from the Carnegie Deli, Theo stood her up. The sandwiches, which Jessie had transported back downtown on the subway as carefully as she would have her own newborn baby, grew cold and greasy. Jessie left them in the white paper bag and stormed down to McSorley's, where she found Theo at a back table with a girl named Ingrid Wu, a first year. They were all over each other. "He cheated on me," Jessie tells Kirby, "so I threw him out." Kirby is smoking again in a more relaxed way, with her elbow hanging out the window. "Good for you," she says. "You deserve better." Jessie rummages through her macrame pocketbook for her sunglasses because suddenly she feels like she might cry. She'd wanted to call Theo when Exalta died, but she hadn't because she was afraid it would sound like a plea for attention. A dead grandmother, how unoriginal. And yet, Exalta is dead, and it hurts. Jessie and Exalta hadn't been close exactly, but there had been something. A mutual respect and admiration that was, in a way, more meaningful to Jessie than the more typical variety of grandmotherly love. Exalta was proud of Jessie's accomplishments, her impeccable grades at Brookline High and Mount Holyoke, her high LSAT score, her admission to NYU Law. Exalta could be stingy with praise, but she had, more than once, said that Jessie was a young woman with a good head on her shoulders, who had a very bright future. Along with her cut-offs and her crocheted tank, Jessie is wearing the gold knot and diamond necklace that Exalta gave her for her 13th birthday. Jessie lost the necklace the very first time she wore it, and she'd spent one fraught week of her 13th summer in a state of agitated panic. Mr. Crimmins found the necklace, thank God, and Exalta kept it in her custody until Jessie turned 16. At that point, Jessie put it on, and she has never taken it off. It has been witness to every second of the past 7 years. It's a talisman and a reminder of Exalta's belief in her. Good head on her shoulders. Very bright future. Theo Feigelbaum be damned. You're right, Jessie says, thinking maybe her sister isn't such a terrible influence after all. I do deserve better. Chapter 2. Baby, what a big surprise. Over her mother's protests, Blair tells her 9-year-old twins, George and Jenny, to climb into the once red, now nearly pink, International Harvester Scout, their family beach vehicle that refuses to die. Blair is taking the twins into town for hot fudge sundaes at the sweet shop. They arrived on Nantucket an hour earlier, and ice cream sundaes are their first afternoon on island tradition. Your grandmother's body isn't even cold yet, Kate says, before Blair heads out the door after the twins. What are people going to say when they see you and the children with whipped cream all over your faces? They'll think we're trying to cheer ourselves up, Blair says. She gives Kate a pointed look. The kids have been through a lot recently. Well, Kate says, and she meets Blair's gaze. Whose fault is that? Blair says. She has been waiting for this exact confrontation, the one where Kate blames Blair for her divorce from Angus, even though their split was hardly Blair's fault. Angus dragged Blair and the children down to Houston for the most miserable year of their lives so that he could work at NASA on the Viking mission to Mars. The children despised their new school. The other kids made fun of their accents. And Blair felt adrift in the Astronaut Wives Society. It was as though she had stepped back in time rather than forward. The astronaut wives didn't have careers. They spent their days getting manicures and planning fondue parties. When Blair mentioned, at the one garden lunch she attended, which was held looking at the garden through a plate glass window because it was too beastly hot to eat on the patio, that she resented having to give up her adjunct professor job at Radcliffe, everyone at the table had stared at her, forks suspended over their cottage cheese as though Blair was speaking in tongues. Blair hadn't made a single friend, and neither had the children. Even a swimming pool in their backyard didn't cheer them up. The kids sat in front of the color television and started speaking to each other in a new language they called Brady, saying things like, George, glass, and Marcia, 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 in a way that seemed to have a secret meaning. Angus was, of course, never around. He had a cot at NASA and spent the nights there. In a moment of desperation, Blair had bought the children a dog, thinking this might help. And it had initially. They went to the SPCA and picked out a mutt, some kind of spaniel-terrier mix. The children named him Happy, which made Blair melt a little. Her twins were remaining optimistic. But Happy was not happy once they brought him home. He was lethargic. He slept 22 hours a day, rising only to limp over to his bowl of chow. A trip to the vet revealed that Happy was a very sick dog. He had tumors all down his spine. In the X-ray, Blair could see them, evenly spaced like pearls on a string. The vet said the kind thing would be to put the dog to sleep. The death of the dog brought Blair to the end of her rope. She surprised Angus at his office and begged him to return to his job at MIT in Cambridge. Angus was his usual opaque and uncompromising self. He had a project here in Houston, the Viking mission, Mars. Then the children and I will go back alone, Blair said. She hadn't necessarily meant to ask for a divorce. She had imagined they could work out some kind of long-distance commute. but Angus said he planned on staying in Houston. In addition to the Viking mission, he was in on the ground floor of the space shuttle program. His future was at NASA, and if Blair and the children refused to support him, well then, he supposed that constituted irreconcilable differences. "There's no reason we can't work out a civil arrangement," Angus said. "You and the children will be well cared for." And they have been, financially. Blair took sole ownership of their home in Chestnut Hill. The children are enrolled back at Noble and Greenough. Blair will return to Radcliffe in the fall. Their life is remarkably similar to the way it was before they left. The interlude in Houston was like the pain of childbirth. As soon as it was over, Blair forgot about it. This is not to say all was hunky-dory. Angus hasn't flown up to see the children even once since they left. They have a Sunday evening call scheduled. This consists of Angus asking how the children are doing. Fine. Then how things are going in school. Fine. Are they getting good marks? Yes. Then he tells them, "Be good for your mother." "We will." And then, with what seems like enormous relief, one or the other of them will hand the phone back to Blair, who will listen to Angus say, "This month's check is in the mail. We'll talk next week." Being a divorcee at Radcliffe is no big deal. Cambridge is filled with free-to-be you-and-me families, divorced mothers and fathers, unmarried couples with children, gay and lesbian couples, biracial couples, married couples with adopted children. Blair's best friend from her Wellesley days, Sally, has given up on ever finding a suitable man and is now a single mother by choice. She used a sperm donor, a 6'2" engineer with dark hair and dark eyes, and she now has a 4-year-old son, Michael. Chestnut Hill, the affluent Boston suburb where Blair lives, is another story, however, as is the community at the children's school. Everyone is married. Everyone drives a woody wagon with the back seat and the backety-back crowded with kids and at least one dog, a golden retriever or Irish setter. Blair has a circle of lovely, well-meaning friends who were thrilled when Blair and the kids moved back. But once Blair admitted that Angus wouldn't follow in 6 months or a year, he was staying in Houston permanently, they were getting a divorce, she sensed everyone pulling back a few inches so they could better judge her. They were sad for her, they said, even though she herself was much happier. The truth, Blair knows, is that her so-called friends see divorce as a virus, and if they get too close, they might catch it. Tom Murray from 3 houses down offered to mow Blair's lawn, which was very kind, but Blair felt she had to say no. The last thing she wanted everyone to see was another person's husband mowing her lawn or shoveling her snow. She hired a caretaker, a 24-year-old Puerto Rican named Jefe. He was handsome and friendly, and the kids loved him, especially George. Once Jefe admitted that he had been a baseball star back in Ponce. Blair had once looked out the window to see George and Jefe playing catch in the front yard and, in a moment she regretted perhaps more than any other in her life, she told Jefe that she wasn't paying him to play games and that he should leave immediately. Jefe had been hurt. George had stormed off in a sullen rage, and Blair ran up to her bedroom to cry. She knew that George needed a man around, but she couldn't bear to have the neighborhood whispering about exactly what role Jefe the caretaker was filling over at the Whalen house. Being divorced is a social stigma. There's no denying it. Blair thinks about dating again, but how to go about it? Back in April, she let Sally talk her into an outing with Parents Without Partners, which Sally called PWP. Blair and the twins and Sally and little Michael had joined the other single mothers and fathers and their children at Fenway Park to see the Red Sox play the Philadelphia Phillies. It was meant to be fun, Blair knew, like a grown-up version of a mixer in college. The weather cooperated. It was sunny and warm enough to sit in the bleachers without a jacket or sweater. But Blair found herself preoccupied with what was wrong rather than what was right. On the one hand, Sally chose well. Because it was a baseball game, most of the other participating parents were men. However, Blair couldn't find a single candidate she would consider dating. Some men were fat and sloppy, some had stringy comb-overs, some had facial hair that reminded Blair of Charles Manson. But it wasn't only appearances that put Blair off. After all, Angus had looked like a central casting Poindexter. The problem was that the PWP fathers carried the stench of desperation. Most of them slouched, and those who did stand up straight seemed angry at the world. The gentleman closest to Blair, he introduced himself as Al Sparks and looked straight at her chest, wasn't bad-looking, but he jumped out of his seat after nearly every pitch and cursed at the umpires. He swore in front of his two sons, though they didn't notice because they were too busy tussling over the bucket of popcorn he'd bought for them to share, until the older son pulled a little too hard and the bucket upended all over the seat in front of them, which was occupied by a toddler who had fallen asleep with his head cocked at an unnatural angle while his oblivious father kept track of the stats in a spiral-bound notebook. The children at this outing seemed like ragamuffins. Blair didn't like to be ungenerous, but she couldn't help noticing a little girl with tangled hair and a boy, nearly obese, whose father had stuffed him like a sausage into a Yastrzemski jersey. The children looked motherless, and this made Blair suspect that, while she was here looking for someone who would trim the hedges and take the car for an oil change, the gentlemen were looking for a woman who knew how to French braid and who might be willing to cook a hot breakfast every morning. If Blair were to date, or, God forbid, marry one of the men in PWP, she would become a stepmother. This wasn't something she had considered. Of course, Blair had been raised by a stepfather, David Levin, who had been perfect in nearly every way. But that felt different somehow. Kate had been tragically widowed. David had swooped in to save the day. It hadn't been two broken families awkwardly trying to fit themselves together. Blair is too much of a feminist to admit that she's now looking for a David, a single man without children who will love Blair, George, and Jenny unconditionally. But secretly, she fears she is. The Red Sox game was Blair's one and only foray with PWP. Sally, meanwhile, dated angry Al Sparks for 6 weeks before declaring him an absolute psychopath when he got drunk at a Memorial Day picnic and lost his temper over a frisbee that landed on the grill. Blair is irritated with her mother's comments about the propriety of her taking the children to the sweet shop. Although as she parks the car on Main Street in front of Bosun's locker, she does in fact worry that she will bump into someone she knows who will want to express his or her condolences about Exalta. And how will Blair explain that they're on their way out for Sundays? "Let's hurry along," Blair says. The twins are in the back seat, completely oblivious to their surroundings, despite the rumbling of the Scout over the cobblestones. Jenny is immersed in her book of science experiments, and George is doing the crossword puzzle from the Boston Herald. They are, Blair thinks somewhat mournfully, Angus's children, obsessed with the world of the mind. But then she brightens, because at least the twins look like Blair. They're both blonde, pink-cheeked, nicely proportioned, and they have straight white teeth. Jenny is an inch or two taller than George, but that will soon change. Next month, they'll be 10. How did that happen? You know, Blair says, I went into labor with the two of you on this very street. We know, they say in unison. Of course they know. It's part of Foley, Levin, Whalen family lore. In the summer of 1969, while Angus was in Houston working on the Apollo 11 mission to the moon, Blair went into labor right in the middle of Butner's department store. She had taken Jessie in to be fitted for her first bra when her water broke. Blair had waddled up Main Street, leaking amniotic fluid all over the brick sidewalk, while Jessie ran ahead to get Kate, who appeared moments later in the Scout. Because Blair couldn't possibly endure a trip over the cobblestones, Kate had driven down one-way Fair Street in reverse. The twins had been born the next morning, a scant hour before the moon launch. Blair climbs out of the car and has to snap her fingers through the open back window to get the twins to move. Let's go, she says. Hot fudge. Blair? A voice says. Blair Foley? Blair has been inside the sweet shop for 10 seconds, just long enough to shepherd the twins to the end of the line. The sweet shop never changes. It's still deliciously cool and smells like vanilla waffle cones. Blair turns. A man is standing at the cash register holding a double scoop of Rocky Road in a sugar cone. He accepts a quarter in change, grabs a napkin from the dispenser, and heads right for Blair with a sly smile on his face. Blair tries to prepare herself. Who is this? The man is her age. He's wearing a powder blue leisure suit and blue gradient lens glasses. His reddish hair is long and feathered. Surely this isn't someone she knows. It's Larry, he says. Larry Winter. Larry Winter. Blair dated Larry Winter for 3 consecutive summers when she was a teenager. In those days, Blair, Kirby, and Tiger lived in the guest cottage of Exalta's house, called Little Fair. Larry Winter would ride over from Walsh Street on his Schwinn, throw a pebble at Blair's bedroom window, and the two of them would neck. Larry perched on the top rail of the fence, Blair tucked between his legs. To this day, it was some of the loveliest kissing Blair can remember, and some of the purest desire. They had been caught once by Mr. Crimmins, the caretaker, who had passed down the side street, Plum Lane, late at night on his way home from somewhere, probably Bosun's locker. He'd stepped out of the darkness, startling them both, and said, "Time to call it a night, kids." Then he carried on his way in the direction of Pine Street, where he lived in an efficiency. Blair remembers wanting to chase after him, to beg him not to tell her mother or, horrors, her grandmother. But Blair needn't have worried. Mr. Crimmins kept her secret. "Larry," Blair says, "what a surprise! I thought you were a Floridian these days." She hopes she has this right. Larry Winter went to Georgetown to study political science, but somehow he'd ended up as the food and beverage manager at a private club in Vero Beach. He'd risen to general manager and then had started a venture of his own somewhere else in Florida. The Everglades, maybe? "I'm up for a couple of weeks," Larry says. "The heat in Florida this time of year, even in the Keys." Key Largo, Blair thinks with a mental snap of the fingers. He owns a nightclub in Key Largo. Plus, Grandma isn't getting any younger. Larry stops himself. Which reminds me. I heard about Exalta passing. I'm so sorry. Blair feels tears burn her eyes. The sweet shop is only a few blocks away from Exalta's house on Fair Street, and it's inconceivable that, should Blair and the twins venture up there after their Sundays, the only person they would find would be Mr. Crimmins, who would become Exalta's devoted companion. Unlike Blair, Exalta hadn't given one whit what people thought about her shacking up with the caretaker. She and Bill Crimmins had fallen in love. For the past 10 years, Exalta had been a different woman. Gone was the stern, judgmental blue blood, and in her place, they'd enjoyed a fun-loving old lady who listened and laughed. When Blair last visited Exalta, she had meant to tell her grandmother that she and Angus had divorced. But Exalta was so sick and frail at that time, swimming in and out of lucidity, that Blair couldn't bear to deliver the news. Exalta had adored Angus. Why burden her with news that would only make her sad and disappointed? At that point, Exalta had still been living in her house in Boston, on Mount Vernon Street in Beacon Hill. But a few days after Blair's visit, Exalta sat bolt upright in bed and clearly announced that she wanted to spend her final days in the house on Nantucket. And so Bill Crimmins arranged for a door-to-door ambulance transfer. The ambulance even went over on the ferry, and they installed Exalta comfortably in the house on Fair Street, where she died 2 days ago, none the wiser about Blair and Angus. Blair leaves the twins in line and steps away a bit, so she can talk to Larry more privately. "As I'm sure you've heard," she says, "I got divorced." Larry turns his head so he's looking at her with only one eye. This, she recalls, is a gesture of his. "I had not heard that, actually." Ah, right. Larry lives in Florida. The only person who would have told him is his grandmother, Mrs. Winter, and she would only have heard from Exalta. Even so, Blair is glad she came out with it before Larry had a chance to ask about Angus. Blair shrugs. "Didn't work out. But the kids and I are fine. We live outside of Boston. Everyone's happy." She flashes Larry a smile that she hopes indicates happy, or appropriately happy, considering they're on island to attend a funeral. "How about you? Married? Kids?" Larry stares at the ice cream cone that is slowly melting in his hand. "Not married, no kids," he says. "Haven't met the right woman." Blair feels herself flush. "Oh, well, I'm sure it's only a matter of time." Larry stares at his cone for a second. He must be finding this run-in as surreal as she is. "So, listen. I'm planning on coming to the funeral and the reception, escorting my grandmother." "Of course," Blair says. "You belong there. And Kirby has planned a bonfire tomorrow night at Ram Pasture, young people only." Larry laughs. "That leaves me out." "And me," Blair says. "I'm 34, twice as old as the summer we last dated." "I've got you by a year, don't forget. And you, Blair Foley, are far more gorgeous now than you were at 17. Flush turns to blush. He's lying, though Blair has lost a lot of weight since the divorce, and now might be nearly as slender as she was in high school. "Thank you, Larry. I needed to hear that." "I'll see you tomorrow," Larry says. "Enjoy your ice cream." Blair is as preoccupied as the twins as they sit and eat their sundaes. Blair made George and Jenny leave their projects in the car, and so they've moved on to their second favorite pastime, dissecting a special trilogy episode of The Brady Bunch. The Bradys go to Hawaii. They find a tiki that appears to be cursed. Greg Brady has a surfing accident. A tarantula crawls on one of the other brothers, And then Blair loses the plot when they start talking about a cave and someone or something named Oliver. Doesn't matter. Blair is doing her own dissecting. Larry Winter, of all people, single and without children, telling Blair she looked more gorgeous than she had at 17. And she'll see him tomorrow, at the funeral, the reception, and the bonfire. Time to go, Blair says, though she has barely touched her Sunday at all. Blair drives back to her mother and David's sprawling beachfront compound on Red Barn Road, listing Larry Winter's pros and cons. The only con she can come up with is that he lives in Florida and owns a nightclub, which might explain why he looks like one of the Bee Gees. Well, another con is that Blair felt no particular emotion when she saw him, other than a fondness when remembering the kissing. And she'd liked being complimented, of course, because who didn't? But there was definitely something missing. A zing, a ping, a tingle. They had broken up so long ago, Blair remembers, because she had grown tired of him. The pros are that he's single and without children. But surely she's entitled to ask for more than just that. Blair wonders if the divorce has turned her heart to ice. Look at how she spoke to poor Hefe. Maybe she'll feel differently about Larry tomorrow night at the bonfire, once she's had a few drinks. Maybe her run-in with Larry was meant to be, orchestrated by Exalta, who was watching out for Blair from above. The driveway of Kate and David's compound is crowded with cars. Blair sees the Trans Am that Tiger drives. He'll have to give that thing up once he and McGee finally have children. She sees Kirby's LTD and Mr. Crimmon's pickup truck. And she sees a turquoise Porsche 911 with the top down. Blair freezes. Only one person she knows would drive a car like that. Looks like we have company, Blair says. Kate and David bought the sprawling old house on Red Barn Road 10 years earlier, right after the twins were born, back when Tiger was still over in Vietnam. They lived in it for 5 years without making a single change. Then, once Jessie left for Mount Holyoke and Kate no longer had children at home, she and David sold the big house in Brookline, rented an apartment in Charles River Park, and poured their time, energy, and resources into the Nantucket property. The main house got a complete facelift, a new roof, new doors and windows, new wood floors throughout, except for the family room, which they carpeted, paint for all the bedrooms, an updated kitchen with avocado green appliances, and bright pink and orange wallpaper so that when you were at the counter making a sandwich, you felt like you were standing in the middle of fruit ambrosia. Only Exalta was brave enough to say to Kate, "You might have chosen something more classic, darling." But Kate wanted a happy, modern house as a counterpoint to the staid, history-laden confines of All's Fair. She and David built a guest cottage on the back edge of the property, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath. This was where Blair and Angus had always stayed with the children, now just Blair and the children. Between the guest cottage and the main house, they built a clay tennis court and a turquoise lozenge of an in-ground pool that had a curved fiberglass slide at one end. There was a concrete patio for barbecuing and even a portable tiki bar that David hauled out of the shed every Memorial Day for the summer. Kate had newly discovered frozen blender drinks, strawberry daiquiris and margaritas, which she served in obscenely large glasses that she got on sale at Kmart. If the whole thing sounded out of character for Kate, well, it was a bit. But Kate made no secret that she wanted the compound filled with grandchildren someday. On that front, Blair had done her part. The onus now fell to her other 3 siblings. Kirby, Tiger, and Jessie are all out on the back patio, sitting under the awning by the pool. Mr. Crimmins and Kate and David are there as well, and McGee, Tiger's wife, who quit her dental hygienist's job to care for Exalta when she first fell sick. Kate had been relieved, Blair knows. She was certain the reason Tiger and McGee didn't have children was because McGee worked too hard. The blender isn't purring. The grill isn't smoking. There isn't a drink in sight, not even iced tea. Kate is holding tight to her principles. They are a family in mourning. No one will enjoy himself. Blair's not sure how she'll explain that she and the children have just been to the sweet shop, though perhaps Kate has already announced this. Perhaps everyone has been discussing Blair's blasphemy, her loosened morals since getting divorced. Tiger moves to the edge of the patio to light a cigarette, and he's joined by a dark-haired gentleman wearing a white polo, Madras shorts, and Wayfarer sunglasses. Blair's heart isn't frozen after all, because suddenly it revs like a race car engine. She will be taking a ride in that Porsche later, her face raised to the night sky, her hair streaming out behind her. It's Joey Whalen, Angus's little brother, who was Blair's boyfriend before and after she met Angus. "How about that, my darlings?" Blair says. "Your uncle is here." Chapter 3. Sad Eyes. McGee hasn't stopped crying since Exalta died, and finally, on the morning of the funeral, Tiger realizes he can't ignore it any longer. This isn't normal run-of-the-mill grief. Something else is going on with his wife. They're in their summer bedroom getting dressed. Kate has okayed navy blazers instead of suits for men. Tiger is still in just khaki pants and an undershirt. McGee is in her slip, her hair in the pink spongy rollers she sleeps in when she wants waves. She's sobbing into Tiger's pajama top, presumably so no one else in the house will hear her. "Mags," he says, sitting next to her on the end of the bed. "What's wrong?" She raises her face, and her sweet, soft pink bottom lip quivers. "I can't believe you have to ask that. Your grandmother is dead." Tiger is careful how he proceeds. Yes, Exalta is dead. Exalta was sick for months, her internal organs shutting down one after another, like someone shutting the lights off in a house before bed. It wasn't a violent death or even gruesome, and it wasn't a surprise. Exalta was 84 years old. Tiger watched men die nearly every day in Vietnam. Some of those men only 18 years old, some still virgins. Exalta had lived a full and privileged life. She had known love not only with Tiger's grandfather, Pennington Nichols, but also with Mr. Crimmins. She had 1 child, 4 grandchildren, 2 great-grandchildren, with more, presumably, on the way. This, Tiger knows, is the real reason McGee is crying. She and Tiger will have been married for 9 years next month, and although they've been trying since day one, they haven't been able to conceive a child. At first, they were too busy to notice. When Tiger got home from his tour, he was eligible to inherit his trust from Exalta. The first thing he did was to buy a house in Holliston, 30 miles southwest of Boston. The house had been built in the 1840s. It was 3 stories and had plenty of charm, 5 bedrooms and a finished playroom in the attic. In retrospect, Tiger wonders if buying such a big house wasn't what jinxed them. The second thing Tiger did was to open a bowling alley on the Holliston-Sherburne line called Tiger Lanes. Tiger had spent countless hours in country dreaming about the perfect bowling alley. He would have 12 state-of-the-art lanes on one side of the building and a pinball arcade on the other, with a soda fountain and snack bar in the middle. There would be music and party lights. It would be a hangout for teenagers and adults alike, a place to bridge the widening generation gap. He would start a Tiger Lanes bowling league for veterans. Tiger is aware that he was lucky to come home not only in one piece physically, but one piece mentally. Lots of veterans found themselves at loose ends. They were traumatized, they'd become drug addicts, they'd become adrenaline addicts, in search of the high that was part of being on the front lines. When every day was a struggle to stay alive, coming home to conveniences like 10 kinds of bread at the supermarket and Johnny Carson every night at 11 felt like trying to sleep in a bed that was too soft. Where was the action, the danger, the purpose? Some soldiers came home from 13 hellish months of defending the ideals of American democracy only to be spit upon, harassed, and called baby killers. None of this happened to Tiger, but that didn't mean he was unaffected by the war. He'd watched his best friends, Puppy and Frog, get blown to bits. They didn't have a chance to make something of their lives, but Tiger did, and he'd be damned if he was going to waste it. He would be enough of a success and make enough positive change in the world for all of them. Puppy, Frog, and every other American serviceman and woman who died in Vietnam. Tiger bought a defunct shoe factory and transformed it into the first Tiger Lanes. It was such a surprising success that Tiger opened a second location in Franklin the following year, followed by one in Needham and one in Mansfield. He then opened the grandest of them all, a flagship with 20 lanes, a disco floor, and a full bar in Newton. At that point, Tiger sold the 5-bedroom in Holliston and bought a brick center entrance colonial in Wellesley that had 4 bedrooms and a finished basement rec room with shag carpeting and a wet bar. The house also had a detached 2-car garage where Tiger kept his Trans Am and McGee's hot rod, a Datsun 240Z. McGee still worked as a dental hygienist for Dr. Breza in Waltham. She'd been working there since Tiger met her, and she told Tiger she would only leave once she got pregnant. There had been some tense discussions, spurred by visits to Tiger's parents, about McGee's job being the reason why they didn't yet have a baby. Kate Levin felt that McGee should stay home and develop a nurturing side. She should do the things that mothers did: go to the salon, volunteer, redecorate, take a pottery class at the community center. Kate privately asked Tiger if it wasn't difficult for poor McGee to clean the teeth of 16 children per day, none of whom were her own. And how did she handle the busybody mothers, who must be wondering when McGee would have good news to share? McGee held up to Kate surprisingly well. She loved her job, loved her patients, loved Dr. Breza. There had been one agonizing moment when Tiger wondered if maybe McGee actually loved Dr. Breza. Maybe they were having an affair, and McGee was secretly on the pill so as not to become pregnant with Dr. Breza's baby. When Tiger came home, after a few too many beers following the Vietnam Veterans Bowling League Championship, and asked McGee if this were the case, she crumpled. She wasn't having an affair with Dr. Breza or anyone else. She loved Tiger. She wanted a baby with Tiger more than she wanted to breathe. She didn't know what was wrong. She didn't drink, didn't smoke, and didn't take Quaaludes like so many other Wellesley women did. McGee quit her job and gave Kate's method a try. She joined the Ladies' Auxiliary, audited an anatomy class at Pine Manor, learned to roller skate because she heard it was good for physical fitness. When there was still no sign of a baby, McGee agreed to see a doctor. McGee's own mother had a theory that radiation from all of the mouth x-rays that McGee administered had somehow fried her insides. McGee knew this wasn't the case, but she submitted herself to a complete physical exam at the Brigham nonetheless, which involved a lot of poking and prodding, both of McGee's body and her psyche. McGee waited 3 days for the results of the exam. All she could think of was Jennifer Cavallari in Love Story learning that she had leukemia. But when the call finally came, it was with the news that she was in perfect working condition. Then it was Tiger's turn. He'd been at war. He could have been exposed to chemicals or gases that affected his sperm count or motility. And so he went to the Brigham as well and gave the doctor a specimen. That was weird. But his sperm count was high, his swimmers veritable Olympians. The problem then became that there was no problem. The problem was lack of patience and high expectations. The problem was that sex stopped feeling like a natural manifestation of Tiger's love for his wife and more like a test he was failing. McGee started going to the public library to research fertility issues. There were options, medical procedures, drugs that could be pursued right there in Boston, right at the Brigham. The science, McGee said, was remarkable. A baby had been conceived in a test tube. Tiger didn't want his child conceived in a laboratory. Call him old-fashioned, call him stodgy, but he'd rather adopt one of the millions of children orphaned in Vietnam than be subjected to drugs and procedures. Before McGee could get too carried away, life intervened. Exalta got a head cold that turned into pneumonia. Before she was fully recovered, she suffered a minor stroke and became bedridden. Bill Crimmins was good for hand-holding, but not much else. Kate was alternately too worried and too impatient to be helpful, and so she looked into hiring private nurses, but it was very expensive for round-the-clock care. McGee saw a chance to put to use all the love and attention she had been storing up for their future children. She spent countless hours caring for Exalta. She fed her soft foods, made sure she took her pills, read to her, plumped her pillows, sat with her through endless episodes of The Flying Nun, consulted with Exalta's doctor over the phone, and with the night nurse each morning. Now that Exalta is gone, so is McGee's newfound purpose. And what's left is not only Exalta's absence, but the absence of a baby as well. Tiger gets it. He hasn't been inside a church in over 10 years. Even when he and McGee got married, it was outside on the front lawn of his parents' Nantucket home. He can't quite explain why he's avoided it. He certainly has a lot to be grateful for. His success in business, his beautiful, devoted wife. Hell, the mere fact that he's alive. A lot of guys Tiger knew in the war became either atheists or born-again Christians. If there's one thing Tiger learned, it's that God doesn't live in a church. For Tiger, God lives in the shaking hands of a U.S. Air Force fighter pilot who needs Tiger to tie his bowling shoes, but who can, somehow, send a 10-pound ball down the boards for a strike. God is in the illuminated windows of Tiger's neighborhood, homes occupied by Americans who are safe and sound inside, enjoying pot roast and Donnie and Marie. God is in the Firestone tires of Tiger's Trans Am, in the gravelly voice of Wolfman Jack on the radio, in 4-year-old Joey Bell from down the street who saluted when Tiger marched past in the Memorial Day parade. God is in the glove of Carlton Fisk. God is in the ocean as seen from the windows of their summer bedroom. God is in all these places, so why would Tiger, or anyone, need to go to church? Well, today he needs to go so his mother doesn't wallop him. She spies him smoking outside the front door of St. Paul's Episcopal and, perhaps, suspects that he'd like to skip the service altogether because she plucks the cigarette from his mouth and grinds it out beneath the sole of her black slingback heel. "Get inside," she says, "and pray for your grandmother." "Too late now," Tiger deadpans. Then he grins. Will his mother find this funny? Kate shakes her head before letting a fraction of a smile slip. "Pray for yourself, then, and your sainted wife." Maybe he should go inside and pray for a baby, he thinks. It couldn't hurt. Chapter 4. Heart of Glass. With Exalta's death, Kate is now the matriarch of the family. Alongside her deep sorrow, she feels a rush of power, of agency. There's no one left to please, no one left to placate, no one left to impress. There is no one left to judge her. She's free. Is it horrible to feel this way? Kate whispers to David in the car. I loved her. You worshipped her, David says. I respected her. You revered her. I even liked her at times. She was a great deal easier to deal with once we bought our own house, David says, and once she and Bill got together. Bill Crimmins, yes. Kate owes a tremendous debt to Bill, not only for 4 decades of service to their family and the house, but for the past 10 years as Exalta's companion. In her will, Exalta granted Bill lifetime rights to All's Fair and Little Fair. Only when Bill dies will Exalta's Nantucket home pass to Kate. This was an appropriate gesture, and yet Kate can't help but worry that Bill will mend his relationship with his daughter Lorraine, who is responsible for every bit of heartbreak Kate has known in her life. And Lorraine Crimmins will end up spending time, maybe even entire summers, in All's Fair. Bill Crimmins wouldn't encourage this, certainly. However, if Lorraine discovers, from one of her former chums at Bosun's Locker, let's say, that Exalta has died and Bill has been granted residency and decides to simply show up, would Bill have the willpower to turn her away? Kate fears the answer is no. So many of us are powerless when it comes to our own children. Kate tries to push all unpleasant thoughts from her mind in order to be properly attentive during the service. She, David, and Mr. Crimmins sit with the twins in the first pew, while Kate's 4 children and McGee sit behind them. Exalta wanted 0 frills. Straightforward service, no poetry, no eulogizing, no dreadful receiving line where Kate and the children would have to, in Exalta's words, listen to everyone lie about what a wonderful woman I was. Reverend Meeker conducts a proper mass, without communion, also Exalta's choice, and during his rather bland homily, Kate's mind wanders. Exalta built an extraordinary family, although really, it was Kate, Exalta's only child, who built it. She had her first 3 children with Lieutenant Wilder Foley, and then, once Wilder confessed to an affair with Lorraine Crimmins, got Lorraine pregnant and shot himself, Kate married David Levin and had Jessie. Each of her 4 children has something that sets them apart. Blair has the twins, Kirby the glamour, Tiger the money, and Jessie the smarts. They also each have problems. Blair is divorced, Kirby wild. Tiger and McGee can't seem to conceive. And Jessie, well, Jessie is a long way still from being settled. Reverend Meeker lifts his palms to the sky. They stand for the creed, segue into prayers, and sing the final hymn, I Am the Bread of Life, then await the benediction. Exalta's casket is so close to Kate she can reach out and touch it. But Kate doesn't feel even the faintest vestiges of her mother's spirit hovering. To haunt one's own funeral, Exalta might say, just isn't done. Better to make a complete and graceful exit. Think of me fondly, but for heaven's sake, don't cry. Kate doesn't cry. Exalta raised her sensibly. However, Kate does notice Mr. Crimmins pulling a handkerchief from his pocket and dabbing at his eyes, which is sweet. McGee's muffled sobs are less so, though understandable considering how much time she spent with Exalta at the end. One of Exalta's last clear-minded quips to Kate was a sotto voce comment after McGee left Exalta's bedside to go fetch Exalta some tapioca pudding. I see I have a new best friend, Exalta said. All in all, Kate is relieved when the service is over, and even more relieved once the casket is lowered into the ground in the cemetery on Hummock Pond Road, and the rich, fresh dirt is smoothed over the top. Jenny squeezes Kate's hand so tightly she nearly fuses Kate's fingers. Cemeteries are scary for children. Nobody likes to think about being put in a box and buried for all eternity. Kate nearly says, "We can come visit Grandnanny here whenever you want," but she doesn't want Jenny to think for 1 second that Exalta is actually here. And so she says nothing at all. Kate can't get to the Field and Oar Club fast enough. She's in desperate need of a drink. She sucks down a Mount Gay and tonic. This has been the favorite cocktail at the club in recent years, and makes sure that all 4 of her children are present and accounted for on the lawn between the clubhouse and the waterfront before she begins the odious business of socializing. It's a brilliant day with deep blue skies and a tennis wind, enough to be refreshing but not so strong that you wished you were out sailing. There seemed to be more people at the reception than were at the church, and isn't that just typical of their set? Skip church, how dull, and choose instead to pay respects over cocktails and the lunch buffet on someone else's chit. Kate sees Bitsy Dunscombe step onto the brick patio with her second husband, Arturo, her identical twins, Heather and Helen, and their husbands. Heather and Helen are Jessie's age, 23. They both went to Briarcliff, and are both new housewives of just under a year. Bitsy and her loathsome first husband, Ward Dunscombe, threw the twins a double wedding here at the club last July. Kate and David had attended, mainly because Bitsy declared it would be the wedding of the decade, and Kate had wanted to see what that looked like. For Kate, the best part of the wedding wasn't the girls in matching dresses. They looked lovely, though the double vision came across as something of a sideshow spectacle, but rather when Bitsy's first husband and second husband had a fistfight in the parking lot. By all accounts, it was Ward who threw the first punch. He was a notoriously nasty drunk. But alas, it was Arturo who had gotten posted. Ward was the 6th wealthiest man on Nantucket and was a lifelong member of the Field and Oar, whereas Arturo was a Panamanian national who came to the island to work as a waiter at the Opera House restaurant. Technically, Arturo isn't allowed to set foot in the club, but Kate won't say a word. It's a funeral. "Kate," Bitsy says, her arms open in a V and her head cocked back. "I'm so sorry for your loss. Exalta was one of a kind." These are probably the nicest words Bitsy could say about Exalta without lying, because for 74 of her 84 years, Exalta was imperious, judgmental, and cold. That she had thawed so late in life was the only thing that kept today from being a celebration. Ding dong, the witch is dead. Out of the corner of her eye, Kate sees Bill Crimmins standing out on the dock, hands crammed into his pockets, gazing at the water. He might feel more uncomfortable here at the Field and Oar than even Arturo. Kate should go over and bring Bill into the fold, but she can't dismiss Bitsy quite so fast. "Thank you for coming, Bitsy," she says. "Of course, Mother adored you." This isn't true, but Kate treads lightly where Bitsy is concerned. 10 years earlier, Kate and Bitsy had had a fight in the middle of dinner at the Opera House, the night Bitsy revealed that she was sleeping with Arturo, because Bitsy accused Jessie of stealing from her daughter Heather. Kate had stormed out, indignant, only to later find out that it had been true. Jessie had stolen $5 and a lip gloss from Heather Dunscombe's Bermuda bag. That had been a tumultuous summer for them all. 1969. Kate wouldn't relive that summer for all the tea in China. Kate had never apologized to Bitsy the way she should have, but by the following summer, Ward had found out about Arturo, and a messy divorce followed. Kate made amends by supporting Bitsy and inviting her and Arturo to their new house on Red Barn Road for cocktails. Bitsy had loved the house and intimated that she, too, might leave the socially suffocating cobblestone streets of downtown and move to a place that was secluded and private, where not everyone knows what you had for breakfast. In the intervening years, Kate and Bitsy have handled their relationship like some kind of fragile family heirloom that will shatter if they aren't careful. "I'm sorry we didn't make it to the church," Bitsy says. "Robert had a call with his law firm that ran longer than we expected." Robert was one of the husbands, the lawyer, and the other husband was a doctor. Both twins now lived in Westchester County, one in Rye, one in Ardsley. "But I knew you wouldn't mind. Exalta wasn't particularly religious, was she? She used St. Paul's like the rest of us, for networking." Networking? Kate thinks. What a bizarre thing to say. Their family attended St. Paul's for one reason only, because they were Episcopalian. "Mother loved the music," Kate says. "Speaking of," Bitsy says, "the girls tell me there's to be a bonfire at Ram Pasture tonight in Exalta's honor, for the young people." "Bonfire?" Kate says. "Ram Pasture? I think you must be mistaken. I've heard nothing about this." "Helen?" Bitsy says, calling over one perfectly coiffed twin who's wearing a Lily Pulitzer patio dress printed with turquoise giraffes. "Didn't you tell me there was a bonfire tonight at Ram Pasture?" "Yes," Helen says. "Midnight at the Oasis, Kirby is calling it. Heather and I have been discussing what to wear. It sounds vaguely Moroccan, so we were thinking caftans." When Helen brings her Mount Gay and tonic to her lips, Kate can't help noticing the enormous diamond on her left hand, resting over a simple gold wedding band. She fights the jealousy she feels that Bitsy has 2 married daughters, and Kate has 0. 0 married daughters out of 3. "Kirby is so clever, so sophisticated." "Yes," Kate says. "Isn't she just?" Kate finds Kirby looking deceptively wholesome in a sleeveless navy silk sheath with one of Exalta's brooches at the neck, eating finger sandwiches and chatting with Reverend Meeker. Kate wonders what Kirby and the Reverend could possibly be talking about. They have exactly nothing in common. Kirby's life in New York, as Kate understands it, Includes a lot of expense account lunches with that dreadful girly brown woman, and then it's off to the disco every night, wearing gold lame jumpsuits. Kirby sleeps with men but doesn't date them. She flits from one to the next like a child who grows bored with her toys. This is her excuse for not settling down. She can't find anyone who holds her attention. She thinks marriage should be one episode of laugh-in after another, which it most decidedly is not. "Reverend," Kate says, "I need to borrow Catherine for a moment." "Uh-oh," Kirby says. "If she's calling me Catherine, I'm in trouble. Pray for me, Reverend." Kate leads Kirby into the snack bar, where it's shaded and quiet and smells like French fries. "Did you plan a bonfire for tonight?" Kate asks. "At Ram Pasture? In your grandmother's honor? Did you do this and not inform me? Did you not invite me?" "Mom," Kirby says. Chapter 5. Night Fever. They drive the Scout right onto the sand, near the spot where Tiger dug the giant hole and filled it with stacked wooden pallets that he took from the back alley behind Charlie's Market. Jessie and Kirby set out thin Killam rugs that Kirby transported from New York in the back of the LTD. There was a place downtown that practically gave them away, she said. They cover Kate's long folding table with a tapestry and arrange a row of votive candles down the center. They set out the refreshments: whole salted almonds, dates, dried apricots, an assortment of olives, goat cheese sprinkled with pistachios, Melba toast, hummus, and lots of grapes. Jessie had suggested they also get fixings for s'mores, but Kirby shot that idea down. There were no s'mores in Northern Africa. Well, there were no kegs of Schlitz either, Jessie thinks. And yet that's what they're drinking at this oasis. The keg is in the back of Mr. Crimmins' pickup, which he's letting them borrow, though Mr. Crimmins isn't coming to the bonfire. "You young people have fun," he said, "and tomorrow, come over to the house. Your grandmother left a list of things she wanted you to have." Things she wanted you to have. Exalta's considerable collection of whirligigs and whimmy-diddles will be divided up between the 4 grandchildren. Exalta's jewelry, the rings she kept in exquisite porcelain boxes, and bracelets and necklaces that lived in a locked case, will be passed to Kate, Jessie, Blair, Kirby, and McGee. Even 1/4 or 1/5 of these possessions will be worth quite a lot, Jessie knows, but only if she sells them. She may, in fact, sell some of the jewelry to ease her 3rd year of law school, maybe buy a new desk lamp or an interview suit. But the whirligigs and whimmy-diddles are so inexorably Exalta's that Jessie could never let them go. She will be their steward until she dies, and every time she sets eyes on them, she will think of her grandmother. People start arriving the second it gets dark. Blair has left the twins back at the house. She hitches a ride to the beach with Tiger and McGee. The Dunscombe twins show up with their husbands. Joey Whalen pulls up in his Porsche, and Larry Winter is driving his grandmother's ancient Jeep Cherokee. There are a bunch of friends of Kirby's from her Mattaketcham days, as well as people that Blair, Kirby, and Tiger knew from sailing at the Field and Oar. Kirby has a boombox, and Tiger brought Sirius speakers. As soon as the fire is lit, there's music. Led Zeppelin's Kashmir sets the mood, followed by Earth, Wind, and Fire, the Doobie Brothers, Bob Seger, Rod Stewart. Jessie stands at the food table and tries an olive, though she isn't hungry. She's not sure who to hang out with. Kirby is surrounded by her old friends, smoking clove cigarettes. Tiger and McGee are talking to the Dunscombe twins about whatever it is that's important to married people. Mortgages, casseroles, and Blair is the bologna in a Larry Winter and Joey Whalen sandwich. Blair tries to lasso Jessie. You remember Larry Winter, don't you, Jessie? He lives in Florida now. Blair obviously wants to do the sorority bump and roll, passing off Larry to Jessie, but nope, sorry, Jessie isn't that desperate for company. Larry Winter is 100 years old, or 35, and he has a mustache like Rolly Fingers. Hitting the keg, Jessie says. She does hit the keg, filling 2 plastic cups with cold Schlitz. Then she strolls past the fire pit to the water's edge. She feels like a stranger in her own family, but there's nothing new about that. She fingers the gold knot at her neck and runs it along the chain. The necklace was originally a gift to Exalta from Jessie's grandfather on the occasion of their first wedding anniversary. It's priceless, and Exalta chose to give it to Jessie. Jessie guzzles down 1 beer, feels a little better, tries to remind herself that, as soon as she wants to, she can rejoin the party and talk to Heather and Helen Dunscombe. They went through the predictable trajectory of being friends, then hating each other, then being friends again, after it turned out that both Jessie and Helen Dunscombe had been molested by their tennis instructor, Garrison. But Jessie's afraid they'll have nothing in common now. Jessie is in law school and lives in Greenwich Village. She's single. The twins are married and live in the suburbs. Jessie takes the subway. The twins drive station wagons. This time next year, Jessie will be studying for the bar exam. This time next year, one or both of the Dunscombe twins will be pregnant. Will Jessie still be single this time next year? She can't believe it's 1979 and the first thing a person wants to know about a woman is if she has managed to catch a man. The song changes to Donna Summer, Heaven Knows. Heaven knows it's not the way it should be. Do people care if Donna Summer is married or single? They do not. She is fabulous either way. So there's hope. Jessie has nearly finished her 2nd beer when someone plops in the sand next to her. Jessie Levin, a voice says. Surprise! Jessie turns. Male person, her age or maybe a little older. Shorn head, so what Jessie first thinks is that Tiger saw her sitting by herself, felt sorry for her, and sent over one of his army buddies. Surprise? She says. It's me, he says. Pick. Chapter 6. Paradise by the Dashboard Light. Blair is desperate to get rid of Larry Winter. How had she entertained the thought even for a second that there might still be something between them? He came to the church in a tan leisure suit with a wide-collared paisley shirt underneath, and although he was kind and solicitous with his grandmother, Blair had to close her eyes against the sight of him. Then, at the reception, he'd been stuck to her like flypaper. She was unable to talk to anyone else, meaning she couldn't have a proper private conversation with Joey Whalen. Well, that's not exactly true, is it? There were the stolen moments the night before. After the twins went to the guest cottage to watch Mork and Mindy before bed, Blair slipped out to Joey's Porsche under the auspices of saying goodnight. I can't believe you came, Blair said. Family, Joey said. Yes, well, Blair said, meaning, your brother didn't think it was worth flying up from Houston for. But Angus must have called Joey, because how else would he have heard about Exalta? Maybe Angus suggested Joey appear on Nantucket in his place. Maybe... Is Blair reaching here? Angus realizes that long ago, He thwarted the romance between Blair and Joey, because Blair and Joey had been a couple first. "I'm grateful you're here. And the kids." The kids had been ecstatic when they saw their uncle, all thoughts of experiments and puzzles abandoned. They had launched themselves into Joey's arms like little rockets. Joey was God, Santa Claus, and Jim Rice rolled into one. "I love those kids like they're my own," Joey said. "And me?" Blair wanted to ask. "Do you love me like I'm your own?" Joey is still a bachelor, still working in advertising. He's the head of the national campaign for Stouffer's, so he travels the country and eats a lot of French bread pizza. The pay is good, and he has no one to support but himself, hence the Porsche and a summer place in Newport. "Well, Blair," Joey said, sliding down into the leather bucket seat of the Porsche, "I guess I'll see you tomorrow." Tomorrow meant church, family, obligation. It seemed like Joey was going to leave without so much as a goodnight kiss. Was Blair going to let that happen? Blair ran a finger along the racing stripe. "This car is foxy," she said. "How fast does it go?" Joey hadn't hesitated, even for a second. "Get in," he said. "I'll show you." They'd ended up zipping down the Nantucket road, then careening along Cliff before they stopped to make out at the end of Hinckley Lane. It might have gone even further. Blair might have let Joey have her across the hood, or she might have followed him back to his room at the Jared Coffin House. But at the last minute, she suffered a crisis of conscience and stopped him. "My brother wins again, I see," Joey said. "Just think how it will look," Blair says. "It'll look scandalous. Incestuous, even." This made Joey laugh. "We aren't related," he said. "I know." "But you care what people think," Joey said. "Because you're just like your mother and your grandmother." "I am not," Blair insisted. "I'm my own woman." "If you want to know how it will look, I'll tell you," Joey said. "It'll look like I've been crazy for you since the day I met you. It'll look like I've been biding my time until the inevitable happened and you and Angus split. And even then, I've let a proper amount of time pass. But now I'm here, and I want to make this work." Wasn't that what Blair wanted too? She had thought of Joey every day since returning to Boston, but she'd been too timid, and yes, too conventional, to consider calling him. Plus, he was impossible to pin down. The only person she could have asked about his whereabouts was Angus. So his appearing on Nantucket was both a surprise and an answer to a longing that Blair was hesitant to admit she'd been holding in her heart. "Drive me home, please," Blair said. "I need to think about it." Now, here it is, a full 24 hours later, and Blair has reached a decision. She wants to be with Joey Whalen. Maybe it's outrageous, dating her ex-husband's brother. Or maybe it happens all the time. Angus won't be at all surprised, and neither will Blair's family. The children, though, how will Jenny and George feel about their mother dating their uncle? And their uncle, possibly, becoming their stepfather? Well, they'll either be thrilled or disgusted. Or, more likely, thrilled one day and disgusted the next. But Blair won't sacrifice her own happiness for the sake of the children. She reasons that if she's happy, the children will be happy. This is a modern attitude. Her neighbors will say she's been reading too much Red Book. But come on, it's 1979, and in 6 months, it will be 1980. Blair is going to tell Joey Whalen yes. Yes, she wants to be with him. She doesn't care that he lives out of a suitcase. He can spend time at her house in Chestnut Hill. She can take the twins to Newport. It'll be exciting. Blair will have a family situation that is just as wacky as everyone else at Radcliffe. Her only problem now is a small one. She has to get rid of Larry. But how? He can't take a hint. Kirby approaches out of the darkness. "Anyone here want to smoke some weed?" Blair says, "I bet Larry does." Both Joey and Larry laugh. Then Larry clears his throat. "Actually, I'd love to." "Dynamite," Kirby says. She's wearing an ivory caftan, which in that moment makes her seem like an angel of mercy. "Come on, Larry. Let's go for a walk." Kirby links her arm through Larry's and they wander away. Blair reaches for Joey's hand. "Drive," he says. "You must read minds," she says. "Let's go." Chapter 7. Life in the Fast Lane. The weed is swag. Kirby got it from her Spring Street dealer, Pope, whose product is inconsistent. But it hardly matters because Kirby is with Larry Winter. Kirby stole him right out from under Blair's nose. It's a triumph worthy of its own Cosmo column. When dreams come true, cooking up with your teenage crush as a grown woman. 17 years earlier, in 1962, back when Kennedy was president, Kirby harbored an excruciating crush on Larry Winter, but he had been in love with Blair. Kirby used to babysit Larry's pain-in-the-ass little sisters, and Larry would be saddled with the task of driving Kirby home at the end of the afternoon. Kirby was only 14. She wore braces and had acne across her forehead, and was every bit the ugly duckling. Larry, meanwhile, was a man, 17, 18, headed to Georgetown to major in political science. He wanted to run for president. Reports from Mrs. Winter that were relayed to Kirby from Exalta pointed in a different direction. After college, Larry worked as the food and beverage manager at a private club in Vero Beach, Florida. Kirby won't lie. It was disappointing to hear this. But then recently, Exalta made a point of mentioning that one of the wealthy members of the Vero Beach Club had given Larry seed money, and he was opening a nightclub in Key Largo. A nightclub? That was something Kirby could get behind. She isn't at all surprised that Larry accepted her offer of a toke, because everyone in the nightclub world partook in a little something, and usually more than a little, and occasionally more than one thing. She also isn't surprised when Larry exhales, winces, and says as he passes the joint back to Kirby, "This shit is terrible." "I know," Kirby says. "Sorry. I do have some powder if you want to snort a line." "What?" Larry says. "You mean cocaine?" He sounds completely scandalized, and Kirby rolls her eyes, but it's dark so he doesn't see. You own a nightclub, she thinks, in the Florida Keys? Just south of Miami? Which might as well be renamed Cocaine City? Yes, Kirby says. I mean cocaine. She has a glass vial hanging from a chain around her neck, which she pulls over her head. She taps out a tiny amount onto the back of her thumb and snorts it up. Want a line? No, I don't want a line, Larry says. You should be ashamed of yourself. You just did cocaine right in front of me. Are you stuck in the Stone Age? Kirby asks. Because you sound like Fred Flintstone. I wouldn't have pegged you as being so square. Even in the dark, she can see Larry grin. His teeth are so white, she wonders if they're fake. I'm not square, he says. I was putting you on. Of course I want a line. Ha! Oh boy, Kirby is relieved. She had a vision of Larry tattling on her to Mrs. Winter or, worse, Kate. And then it would be straight to rehab for Kirby. She had thought twice about bringing the cocaine to Nantucket, because no one on the island partied this way, but now her gamble has paid off. She is going to fly high with her teenage crush, Larry Winter. She taps out a bump for Larry, and he hoovers it right up, then sniffs, waiting for the rush to hit. "God damn!" he cries out at the ocean. He turns back to Kirby, who has capped the vial and tucked it back down her dress. "Is it all right if I kiss you?" Hell yes, Kirby thinks. And a second later, she and Larry Winter are making out. But something is wrong. Larry's mouth is open too wide. It feels like he's trying to swallow her. Maybe it's the drugs, or maybe he's just completely inept. They clash teeth, which makes a plasticky sound, and Kirby thinks, definitely false teeth. She pulls away. "Easy there, cowboy." She can feel Larry's erection through his tight polyester pants. The Cosmo girl in her is mildly intrigued. It's bigger than she imagined. But Kirby can't decide how far she wants this to go. She finds herself in this position all the time when she's out. She'll be dancing with some guy, and he'll want more, and if he's cute, or ugly but confident, she'll lead him to her secret alcove and kiss him. But she always remains in control of the situation. Occasionally, this leads to sex in Kirby's loft. She never goes home with anyone, and she never, ever has sex in the club. Part of being a liberated woman, she tells the girls at the magazine, they hang on Kirby's every word, is remaining free to walk away at any moment. Larry grabs the back of Kirby's head and puts his sloppy mouth on hers like she's a Big Mac. She pushes him off again. "Whoa, buddy. Let's slow things down a little." In an attempt to be tender, she reaches up to touch his long, feathered hair. It's soft and silky between her fingers. Larry Winter has good hair, like David Cassidy. And hasn't Kirby always wanted to have sex with David Cassidy? She moves her hands so that she's stroking Larry's long mustache. He used to be so clean-cut. He was an Exeter squash player when he dated Goody Two-Shoes Blair. That Kirby can't help but be delighted by his transformation into a modern man. He isn't stuck in Camelot like everyone else on this land that time forgot island. They start kissing again, but it isn't any better, and Larry's hands are sliding down her back toward her. She pulls away. "Larry," he says, "you are so cool, Kirby. You give off this incredible vibe. Sexy, fun, fascinating. I can't believe I spent so many summers mooning over Blair. I should have been with you." The music from the bonfire floats down the beach. "Rebel, Rebel" by David Bowie. This is Kirby's song. You've torn your dress, your face is a mess. Who is Kirby if not the rebel of her family? She was the one who protested the war, swore at the cops, got arrested, got pregnant out of wedlock, and dated a rainbow of men, including the one who got away, Darren Fraser. Darren ended up marrying Kirby's best friend, Rajani, and they now have 4 beautiful children, which was what motivated Kirby to leave Boston and move to New York, where she has managed to push herself even closer to the edge. Misbehaving is the only way Kirby has ever been able to steal the spotlight from perfect achiever Blair, golden only son Tiger, and Jessie, the precious baby. But now here is Larry Winter telling Kirby that he prefers her to her older sister. All of the longing and jealousy that 14-year-old Kirby with her braces and her acne felt are vanquished, poof, in that moment. Her attraction to Larry Winter was never about Larry Winter, she realizes. It was about how she felt about herself. The satisfaction at being acknowledged as a sexy, fun, fascinating, This adjective gives Kirby a particular thrill. Woman is more powerful than any drug. "Hey, thanks, Larry," she says. "Now, if you'll excuse me, it's time I got back to the party." Chapter 8. Looks like we made it. Tiger can't believe it when McGee asks him to bring her a cold beer from the keg. And he's even more surprised when she chugs the entire thing without stopping. Who is this woman, and what has she done with his wife? She emits a ladylike burp and hands him the empty plastic cup. "Another." "Another?" Tiger says. "Seriously?" "Please," she says. "I want to get drunk." "You?" Tiger can't believe this. "Are you sure?" "Your grandmother is dead," McGee says. "And do you know what advice she gave me?" Tiger is afraid to ask. "What?" "She said, 'When you don't know what else to do, have a good, stiff drink.'" Yes, Tiger thinks that does sound like Exalta. "And I don't know what else to do," McGee says. "We've tried everything." "But you've been so careful with your health." "It's not working," McGee says. "So I'm going to try the opposite." "Okay," Tiger says. He's skeptical, but he fetches McGee another cold beer, and when she finishes that, another. That's 3 beers, but McGee isn't finished. She wants something more, something stronger. "Something stronger?" Tiger says. "There isn't anything stronger at this party." "The flask," she says, "in your glove compartment." "Ha," Tiger says. Guess he should have known he couldn't keep a secret from his wife. There's a flask of wild turkey that Tiger keeps in the glove box of the Trans Am. Tiger offers the flask to any Vietnam vet he happens to meet. McGee is a veteran of sorts, he supposes. She put in all those hours of service to Exalta. "All right," Tiger says. "I'll get the flask." He grabs it from the car, and he and McGee both take a pull. McGee doesn't cough or sputter. She doesn't even grimace. She is tougher than half the guys in the 4th Infantry. Later, Tiger and McGee dance in the sand. The song is by the Bee Gees, Tragedy. But instead of a tragedy, the night feels like a miracle. McGee is joyfully, ecstatically blotto. She raises her hands in the air, she twirls around, sings along. It takes no convincing for Tiger to lead McGee down the beach with one of the Killam rugs rolled under his arm. They lay the rug out in a secluded spot in the dunes, and they make love in a way that they never have before. McGee is uninhibited, carefree, wild. She leaves scratch marks down his back, bites his ear, thrusts right along with him until she screams. Tiger falls back on the rug, breathless. Best of my life, he thinks. Did that feel different to you? He asks. Oh, yes, she says. She props herself up on her elbow and grins at him. Mark my words, Tiger Foley. 9 months from now, you're going to be a father. Chapter 9. Reunited. Jessie didn't learn what she knows about love from being with Theo Feigelbaum. No. Jessie's first teacher in Lessons of the Heart is the man with the shorn head who is now sitting next to her. Pickford Crimmins. Pick. Jessie jumps to her feet. Pick? She says. I thought you were in Africa? I was, Pick says. I got home to Cali last week. And then I called Bill and he told me about Exalta. So I hitched a ride with a buddy who was going to Philadelphia, and I took a bus the rest of the way. I don't... Wow. Jessie needs to get a grip. So, how was the Peace Corps? You were in Kenya, he says. I worked in Nairobi for a while, digging wells. Then I was sent out to the Mara, the Kenyan savannah. It was incredible, Jess. It was like an episode of Wild Kingdom every day. We saw a giraffe give birth, a cheetah kill, prides of lions, baby elephants, the black rhino. For 6 weeks, I lived with the Maasai villagers. I learned how to shoot a bow and arrow. I drank cow's blood. I learned the tribal dances. Jessie nods dumbly. She'd thought it was amazing that she got an A in her torts class and managed to successfully transport 2 pastrami sandwiches on the subway. I'm sorry I didn't have any time to write letters home, Pick says. I'm sure Bill thought I dropped off the face of the earth. He's proud of you, Jessie says, which she's sure is true, though Mr. Crimmins never says much about his own family, probably because his daughter Lorraine, who lives on a commune in California, has caused so much anxiety and confusion for the Foley Levins. Jessie knew Pick went to Africa with the Peace Corps, and she'd been glad to hear that, hadn't she? Partly because she liked knowing that Pick was contributing in a positive way to the world, and partly because Africa was so remote that Jessie's lingering feelings for Pick became a moot point. Pick settles back into the sand, and Jessie follows suit. The party rages behind them, but Jessie doesn't care. Pick is here. So, he says, tell me about everyone. Actually, forget everyone. Tell me about you. I live in Greenwich Village, Jessie says. I'm a second-year law student at NYU. Law school, Pick says. Like your dad. I guess, Jessie says. The law that David practices, corporate litigation, is last on Jessie's list of interests. I want to practice immigration law. Or maybe work for the ACLU. I want to help people. That's my girl, Pick says. Jessie wonders if she's trying to make herself sound altruistic in order to impress Pick. She has never before mentioned immigration or civil rights law out loud. If she'd said this to Theo, he would have gone on a diatribe about Jessie's privilege. She could afford to practice immigration law. Hell, she could become a public defender because she had a trust fund. But as for Theo, he was looking at a big firm, big money future. He wanted to be in-house counsel at a Wall Street bank. I made Bill promise to tell me if you got married, Pick says, so I could come home and disrupt the wedding like Benjamin in The Graduate. Jessie smiles. You did not. I did. Well, I'm not married. Boyfriend? Theo, she says, and even though Pick is sitting a foot away from her, she can feel him tense up. But we broke up. He cheated on me. What an idiot, Pick says. Jessie nudges him with her elbow. You're one to talk. What? That summer you lived with us? You left me in the dust for Sabrina. Sabrina who? Sabrina was the girl you worked with at the North Shore restaurant. You started dating her. Oh, Pick says. I don't remember Sabrina. You don't? Jessie says. She finds this unfair. Jessie had been crushed when Pick introduced her to Sabrina one fateful day at Surfside Beach. It was a moment that has both haunted her and served as a cautionary tale. When you fall in love, your heart opens in a burst of flower petals and gossamer streamers. But beware, because that same heart can just as quickly be cored like an apple, the most tender piece of you extracted and thrown onto the compost pile of the unrequited. For the past 10 years, Sabrina, not the girl herself but the specter of someone prettier and more desirable, has haunted Jessie, inspired her even. You kissed me, Jessie says. "Twice. You really kissed me." "Yes," Pick says. "That I do remember. Upstairs in the cottage. And then a couple of days later, you were dating Sabrina." "I'm the idiot then," Pick says. "All I remember is that you were young. Too young. I thought I'd get in trouble if anything else happened. The dynamic between me and your family was weird. I didn't know why at the time, but I know now. And I'm assuming you know?" "That Wilder Foley was your father?" Jessie says. "Yes." Wilder Foley was Kate's first husband, the father of Blair, Kirby, and Tiger, who had an affair with Lorraine Crimmins and got her pregnant. So Pick is a half-sibling to Blair, Kirby, and Tiger, just like Jessie. "When my mother and I left Woodstock that summer, I told her I wanted to go back to Nantucket to live with my grandfather, and she said we had burned that bridge forever." Jessie takes a breath. Conversations like this happen all the time at funerals and weddings and baptisms, she knows. Secrets are revealed. There are reckonings. "How is your mother?" Jessie asks, desperate to change the subject. "Oh, fine," Pick says. "Busy with her organic farming, which is actually starting to make her some money. She fully believes organic produce is the future." Jessie hasn't the foggiest idea what organic produce is, but she doesn't admit that. "Now tell me about everyone else," Pick says. "Blair, Kirby, Tiger?" He laughs. "Our siblings." The phrase is so surreal that Jessie is stymied for a moment. But then she laughs along and starts to talk. Blair and Angus divorced, Angus in Houston, Blair and the twins in a suburb of Boston. Kirby writes for Cosmo. If you pick up any issue at the grocery store checkout, you'll see her byline. She lives in Soho, house-sitting for this famous artist, Willie 8. Yeah, I've never heard of him either. The only artists I know are dead except for Andy Warhol, who Kirby has met. She has a Polaroid of them together. She hangs out at Studio 54 in Limelight, dancing the night away. Tiger is married to McGee. They don't have kids yet. Tiger owns 5 bowling alleys and he drives that Trans Am you probably saw. He's a good person, my brother. I just want him to be happy. Jessie finds her eyes are burning with tears as she says this. I want them all to be happy. And if I had a magic wand, that would be my first and only wish. For Blair, Kirby, and Tiger to be happy. What about you? Pick says. Don't you want to be happy? Jessie isn't sure how to explain it. She knows, somehow, that she is stronger than her 3 siblings. This is a bold statement because the 3 of them are big personalities. Her sisters are beautiful and smart, and her brother is a war hero. But Jessie worries about the 3 of them in a way that she doesn't worry about herself. I am happy, she says, though I could use another beer. And you should mingle. I don't want to monopolize you. I have to tell you something, Pick says. He gets to his feet and offers Jessie a hand to pull her up. I'm moving to New York. You are? Jessie says. I was offered a job with the Economic and Social Council at the UN, Pick says, which probably sounds fancier than it is. The pay is peanuts. I'm going to have to live in Brooklyn. Brooklyn? Jessie tries not to cringe. That's great, she says. We'll be neighbors. Pick is still holding on to Jessie's hand. Hopefully more than just neighbors, he says. You know, when I was in Kenya, I had this recurring fantasy. He pauses. Want to hear it? Fantasy? Jessie panics, thinking of the one awkward evening when Theo insisted on reading Penthouse Forum letters aloud to her. Sure, she says. My buddy, Tremaine, who I shared a tent with out in the Mara, had this tape recorder and 3 cassette tapes, one of which was The Stranger by Billy Joel. He played it all the time. And do you know that song, Scenes from an Italian Restaurant? Bottle of red? Jessie sings. Bottle of white, Pick cries out. Yes! So, I always thought of you when I heard that song. And I dreamed about meeting you in New York City at a restaurant like that. Red checkered tablecloths, a single candle dripping down the Chianti bottle. The whole deal. He shrugs. I thought it would be romantic. Me, Jessie thinks. He dreamed about meeting me. So, when I get to New York, can we do that? Pick asks. Can we meet at a place like that? Of course, Jessie says. She doesn't eat out at restaurants. She has no money. But the instant she gets back to the city, she's going to find the best Italian place in all of New York. Oh man, you'd better believe it. Chapter 10. We Are Family. The kids are all at the bonfire, which leaves Kate and David at home alone. They watch the sunset, and David opens a bottle of Paul Roger champagne. When Kate raises an eyebrow at the significance, is David celebrating Exalta's death? They always did have an uneasy relationship. He says, "Something to cheer you up." He's right, as always. The bubbles cheer her up. It's an unusually warm evening, so they drink with their feet dangling in the pool, the bottle in an ice bucket between them. Kate's thoughts wander. Where is Exalta now? Anywhere? It seems impossible that she's gone, and yet that's what happens to all of us eventually. It's a reminder to live while we can and take care with the legacy we're leaving behind. Kate feels proud of this house, this property. The decision she made 10 years ago to move out here to the wilds of Nantucket, to build a summer retreat where she can shelter her entire family. It had seemed radical at the time, Kate remembers. Do you want to go out to dinner? David asks. The Mad Hatter? To Marco's? It's too late, Kate says. Everyone stops serving at 9. We could still order a pizza from Vincent's, David says. Or skip dinner and get ice cream. Kate says, let's do something crazy. She can tell from the way his face brightens that he thinks she means sex there in the pool, or scouring Kirby's bedroom for a joint to smoke. I'm game, he says. Let's crash the party, Kate says. We'll pick up Bill and take him with us. It feels like a joyride, even in David's staid lawyer car, the Cadillac. They have the windows down, Elvis on the radio, and Bill Crimmins, who Kate thought might be hesitant to join them, lounging across the back seat, enjoying the fine leather. I'm so glad you called, Bill says. The house feels too big now that she's gone. But Pick is staying with you, Kate says. She finds she's relieved that Pick has shown up, as long as Lorraine is safely on the West Coast, so that there's someone to keep an eye on Bill. They rumble down Barrett Farm Road through the open landscape until they come upon a line of parked cars and Kate hears music. She climbs out of the Cadillac in her bare feet. She's wearing a Paisley Beach cover-up, which is the only thing in her closet that looks even vaguely exotic. If Kate travels back 100 years, okay, 40, she's a teenager being naughty, sneaking out of All's Fair while her parents sleep, and hopping in the back of Trip Belknap's Studebaker, heading to a fire just like this one, populated with boys who do not yet know they'll soon be heading off to war. Tonight, instead of defying her parents, Kate is defying her children. Young people only. Bah! Kate is nearly to the beach when she sees a young couple huddled together, obviously trying to make a clandestine escape. "Blair?" Kate says. Blair is with Joey Whalen. Surprise, surprise. "Mom?" Blair says. Her face has always been easy to read, and her expression now is one of sheer horror. She's been caught with Joey. Joey doesn't look caught, however. Joey is too smooth to ever look caught. "Hey, Mrs. Levin, Mr. Levin, Mr. Crimmins," he says. He spins around and flings his arm open like a game show host, as though the beach and the fire and the assembled crowd and even the ocean beyond are their grand prize. "Welcome!" Blair and Joey together. Is that such a bad thing? Kate wonders. Joey Whalen is much better suited to Blair's temperament than Angus ever was. Joey and Blair dutifully escort the old people with their brittle bones down onto the sand. Blair takes Kate's elbow. "What are you doing here, Mom?" Kate wants to say, "You are hardly one to be asking questions," but instead she smiles. "I came to party," she says, and this sounds so absurd, they both laugh. "Would you fetch me a drink, please, dear? And let your brother and sisters know I'm here." "There's nothing to drink except keg beer," Blair says. "That's fine," Kate says. "I'll have a beer." "You will?" "I will." Blair returns with a foamy beer in a plastic cup, and clearly she has also made the announcement because soon Kate is surrounded by her children, Tiger and McGee, who look happier and more relaxed than Kate has seen them in years. Kirby, who Kate expects to be angry but who instead throws her arms around her mother in what appears to be glee. Jessie, and an incredibly handsome, upright young man whom Kate recognizes as Pick Crimmins. The song changes and a cry goes up. The kids form a circle and start dancing. This, Kate knows, is her cue to exit. But suddenly, David is on one side of her and Bill Crimmins is on the other, and they too are part of the circle. The lyrics announce the obvious: we are family. Kirby dances in the middle of the circle, and everyone cheers her on. She is replaced by Jessie, and Jessie is replaced by McGee. McGee can really dance. How did Kate not know this? McGee heads straight for Kate with her arms outstretched. "Your turn, darling," David says, placing an encouraging hand on her back. My turn? Kate thinks. Surely not. Exalta would never in a million years have been caught in the middle of a circle dancing to a disco song. It takes only a second for Kate to realize that she isn't Exalta. She is Kate Nichols Foley Levin, the new matriarch of this gathered family. She is in charge now, and she will make her own decisions. Kate passes off her cup to David and dances through the sand to the center of the circle. Her family cheers. That's right, she thinks. She may be old, but she still has some surprises left.